The iron gate groaned shut behind her, its echo swallowing every breath, every heartbeat, every prayer whispered by those who watched from above. Callista Turman stood in the center of the beast's pit, her white hair catching the trembling light of torches that lined the stone walls. The red of her dress bloomed like blood against the darkness, a crimson declaration against the inevitability of death. Above her, faces pressed against the railings. Nobles, merchants, common folk drawn by the spectacle of execution. They waited for her screams, for the tearing of flesh, for the confirmation that justice had been served. But Callista did not scream. She did not fall to her knees. She did not beg. Instead, she lifted her chin and stared into the shadows where something ancient stirred. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of earth and old blood. From the deepest corner of the pit, where no torch could reach, came a sound that silenced the crowd. A low rumble, deeper than thunder, older than memory. The ground trembled. Dust fell from cracks in the stone ceiling. And then, slowly, deliberately, the beast emerged. It was enormous, a wolf of nightmare proportions, its black fur absorbing what little light dared approach. Eyes like molten gold fixed upon the woman in red, and its lips pulled back to reveal teeth that could split bone as easily as parchment. Chains hung from its neck and limbs, broken links dragging across stone, evidence of generations spent as the kingdom's executioner. This creature had devoured thieves and traitors, murderers and enemies of the crown. It knew the taste of fear, the texture of desperation. But as it approached Callista Turman, something shifted in the air. The beast paused, its massive head tilted, nostrils flaring as it caught a scent that did not belong to prey. Callista's hand moved to the hollow of her throat. Her fingers, steady despite the proximity of death, drew out a pendant hidden beneath the fabric of her dress. The medallion was old, older than the kingdom itself, forged in silver that seemed to hold moonlight within its surface. Upon it was carved the symbol of the original moon, the mark of the first Lunas who had walked this earth when wolves and humans first learned to speak the same language of the soul. The crowd gasped. The wolf's golden eyes widened. And then, before the assembly of nobles and commoners, before the torches and the stone and the judgment of the living, the impossible happened. The great black wolf lowered its head, not in aggression, not in preparation to strike. It bowed. Miles away, in the western wing of the castle, Elijah Denorius sat rigid in his chair as the council droned through reports of border disputes and grain tributes. His jaw was set, his dark eyes scanning documents without truly seeing them. His long black hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face, the tension in his shoulders. Something felt wrong. A current of unease had been running through him all morning, a whisper at the edge of his consciousness that he could not name. Then, he heard it. Distant, muffled by stone and distance, but unmistakable. The howl of the beast. Elijah's head snapped up. That howl had not sounded in months. The creature was used only for the most severe crimes, and all executions required his personal authorization. He had signed nothing, approved nothing. He turned to the nearest advisor, a thin man with nervous hands. "What is happening in the pit?" The advisor's face went pale. "Your Majesty, I thought you knew." The council made an emergency decision. The woman Callista Turman was found guilty of sedition and sentenced to the beast. The words hit him like a blade to the chest. Callista, the woman who had appeared in his court 3 months ago, quiet and unassuming, carrying medical knowledge that had saved dozens during the recent plague outbreak. The woman whose presence had begun to shift something in the rigid structure of his kingdom, whose words carried weight among the common people, whose eyes held a depth that unsettled the nobles who thrived on maintaining distance between ruler and ruled. The woman he had found himself thinking about in the quiet hours before dawn. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube, extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. I gave no such order. His voice was ice. The advisor stammered, tried to explain about consensus and urgency and the evidence presented, but Elijah was already moving. His chair crashed backward. Documents scattered. He swept past guards and servants, his boots pounding against stone floors as he raced through corridors he had walked 1,000 times. His heart was a war drum in his chest. Every second stretched into eternity. Images flooded his mind, unbidden and brutal. Callista's white hair matted with blood, her red dress torn, her body broken. He should have protected her. He should have seen the fear she inspired in those who clung to old power. He should have known they would act while he was distracted. The stairs to the pit seemed endless. Down, down, down into the earth where the kingdom kept its darkest traditions. Elijah could hear the murmur of the crowd now, could smell the torch smoke and the damp stone. He pushed through the final door and emerged onto the upper gallery, chest heaving, scanning desperately for the scene he dreaded to find. But what he saw froze him in place. Callista stood in the center of the pit, alive and whole, her white hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of starlight. The red dress was unmarked, and before her, the massive black wolf that had torn apart countless criminals knelt with its head pressed to the ground, its eyes closed in an expression that could only be called reverence. Callista's hand rested gently on the beast's enormous head. She was speaking, her voice too low for the crowd to hear, but the wolf responded with soft rumbles that seemed almost like purring. The ancient medallion hung visible against her chest, catching torchlight and throwing it back as moonglow. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Elijah's breath returned in a rush. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that his knees nearly buckled. She was alive. She was unharmed. But in the wake of relief came understanding, sharp and undeniable. Callista Turman was no ordinary woman. She was a Luna. Not just any Luna, but a descendant of the original bloodline. The ones whose connection to the wolf spirit ran so deep that even the most savage beast recognized their authority. The conspiracy clicked into place in Elijah's mind like pieces of a puzzle he had been too blind to see. The nobles who had pushed for her trial were the same ones who whispered about his growing reliance on her counsel, the same ones who profited from maintaining the separation between ruler and people. They had seen what he had only begun to acknowledge, that Callista's presence in his court would change everything, and they had moved to eliminate her before that change could take root. They had acted in his name, but without his knowledge, counting on his absence to seal her fate. And they had underestimated her completely. Callista looked up then, her eyes finding him in the gallery. There was no fear in her gaze, no gratitude for rescue that had come too late to matter. Instead, there was strength, there was certainty, and beneath it all, a flicker of disappointment that cut him deeper than any blade. She had almost died under his rule. Even if he had not given the order, it had been done in his name, in his kingdom, by men who served at his pleasure. The weight of that reality settled on his shoulders like armor forged from guilt and determination. Elijah descended into the pit. The crowd parted, uncertain whether to bow or flee. The wolf raised its head at his approach, those golden eyes assessing him with ancient intelligence. For a moment, king and beast regarded each other. Then the wolf looked to Callista, awaiting her signal. She gave the slightest nod, and the creature relaxed, though it remained close to her side, Elijah stopped several paces away, acutely aware that this moment required more than royal authority. It required honesty. I did not know. His voice carried through the pit, loud enough for all to hear. This was done without my knowledge or consent. But that does not absolve me. You stood in my kingdom, and you nearly died because I failed to see the vipers in my own court. Callista studied him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, each word chosen with precision. The council feared what I represent, not because I sought power, but because the people began to listen when I spoke, because I carry a legacy they thought was buried and forgotten. They threw me to the beast to silence that legacy, to prove that the old ways hold no power in the new order. She gestured to the wolf, which watched the exchange with patient attention. But the old ways are not dead. This guardian has waited here for generations, not as a tool of execution, but as a protector. He was never meant to devour the innocent. He was meant to recognize those who carry the moon's blessing, those who bridge the world of wolf and human. The medallion at her throat seemed to pulse with light. I am Callista Termin, daughter of the Termin line, descended from the first Lunas who walked beside the first Alphas, when this kingdom was nothing but a dream in the wilderness. This beast bows not because I command it, but because he remembers what your council has forgotten. That true authority comes not from fear, but from the bond between leader and pack, between Luna and Alpha, between the moon and those who run beneath it. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Elijah felt the truth of them in his bones, in the wolf spirit that lived within him, in the part of himself that had always felt incomplete, as though he ruled alone when kingship was meant to be shared. He had been taught that the Luna was a ceremonial role, a political alliance, a way to secure borders and bloodlines. But Callista stood before him as living proof that he had been taught lies. The Luna was not an accessory to power. She was the other half of it, the balance to his strength, the wisdom to his force, the moon to his sun. Looking at her now, white hair and red dress and unshakable dignity, Elijah understood that his kingdom had been incomplete, not because it lacked resources or military might, but because it lacked this. It lacked her. He knelt. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. A king did not kneel, not even in his own court. But Elijah was not performing for the nobles in the gallery. He was acknowledging a truth that went deeper than crowns and thrones. "Forgive me," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being, not just for the council's treachery, but for my own blindness. I see you now, Callista Termin, and I swear on my blood and my title that no harm will come to you again. Callista's expression softened, just slightly. She stepped forward, and the wolf moved with her, a silent shadow at her side. She extended her hand, and when Elijah took it, rising to his feet, he felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. Not just physical, though the warmth of her palm sent heat racing up his arm. It was deeper, more fundamental. It was the sensation of two pieces finally clicking into place, of a harmony he had not known he was missing. The bond, whispered through his mind, carried on a voice that was not quite his wolf, but not entirely separate either. She is the bond. That night, after the council members responsible for the conspiracy had been arrested and confined to the tower, after the crowd had dispersed with their gossip and wonder, Elijah found Callista in the castle's eastern garden. Moonlight painted everything silver, and she stood among the night-blooming flowers, her white hair seeming to glow from within. The black wolf rested nearby, a mountain of fur and muscle that radiated protective contentment. She did not turn when Elijah approached, but she knew he was there. "They will not forgive easily," she said quietly. "The nobles who remain will resent that you elevated me, that you listened to a woman with no title and no army." "Let them resent," Elijah replied, coming to stand beside her. I have spent years making decisions based on what they would accept, what would maintain the delicate balance of power. And in doing so, I allowed this kingdom to stagnate. The people suffer while the nobles hoard. Knowledge is suppressed because it threatens their control. You showed me that in 3 months more clearly than a lifetime of court politics ever could. Callista finally looked at him, and in the moonlight, her eyes were luminous. Why did you run? When you heard about the pit, you could have sent guards, you could have observed protocol, but you ran, because the thought of losing you was unbearable. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Elijah had been trained to guard his emotions, to present a face of stone to the world. But with Callista, the walls crumbled. She had faced death without flinching, had revealed her true nature before a hostile crowd, had knelt to no one. She deserved nothing less than complete honesty. I do not know when it began, he continued. Perhaps the first time you stood in my throne room and told me that healing the sick was more important than taxing the farmers who could barely feed themselves. Perhaps when you walked through the plague quarter without fear while nobles fled to their country estates. Or perhaps it was simply inevitable, written in whatever fate binds Alpha to Luna. Callista reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. The touch was feather-light, tentative, testing. I felt it too, she whispered. In the pit, when I heard you coming, when I knew you were racing to save me even though I did not need saving. My heart knew your footsteps before my mind recognized the sound. Elijah covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm more firmly against his cheek. The gesture was achingly intimate, more vulnerable than any kiss. I want to know you, he said. Not the Luna, not the descendant of legends, but you. Callista Turman, the woman who reads medical texts by candlelight and argues with merchants about fair grain prices and somehow tamed the untamable beast with nothing but the truth of who she is. Then ask your questions, Alpha King. I will answer what I can. And so they talked, there in the garden beneath the watching moon. Elijah learned that Callista had grown up in a small village on the kingdom's northern border, that her grandmother had told her stories of the first Lunas, but sworn her to secrecy about their bloodline. That she had come to the capital not seeking power, but fleeing it, hoping to disappear into the anonymity of the city and use her healing skills quietly. But the moon had other plans. The medallion had been her grandmother's final gift, pressed into her hands with instructions to reveal it only when her life depended on it, or when she stood before one who would recognize its significance. I thought I would never need it, Callista admitted. I thought I could live a simple life, help where I could, and avoid the complications of court politics. But the people kept coming to me with their problems, and word spread, and before I knew it, I was standing before you, trying to convince a king to care about those he had never met. And you succeeded, Elijah said, perhaps too well. The nobles saw their influence waning and struck. Callista's laugh was soft and slightly bitter. They struck because they feared that you would make me your Luna, that the bond between us would give the common people a voice they had never had before. They were right to fear it, because that is exactly what will happen. Is that a threat? It is a promise. The conviction in her voice sent a thrill through him. Here was a woman who would not be silenced or sidelined, who would stand beside him as an equal, who would challenge him when he was wrong and support him when he was right. The political Lunas of other kingdoms were decorative, diplomatic tools to be deployed at festivals and state dinners. Callista would be a revolution. Good, Elijah said. This kingdom needs one. The black wolf raised its head, ears swiveling toward the garden entrance. A moment later, a guard appeared, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, the prisoners are demanding to speak with you. They claim they acted in the kingdom's best interest and request a formal hearing. Elijah's expression hardened, the softness of the garden conversation evaporating into the cold authority of a king. Tell them they will have their hearing at dawn, and they will answer not just to me, but to the woman they attempted to murder. The guard's eyes widened slightly, but he bowed again and retreated. Callista watched Elijah with something that might have been approval. "You are different than the man I first met in the throne room. Harder, or perhaps just more honest about the hardness that was always there." "I am the same man," Elijah said. "But I am no longer pretending that mercy and weakness are the same thing. For too long, I thought that keeping the peace meant appeasing those who whispered poison in quiet corners. I will not make that mistake again." He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes was the duality that would come to define their relationship. To the world, to his enemies, to those who threatened his kingdom, Elijah Denorius was a force of nature, unyielding and fierce. But when he looked at Callista, there was tenderness, a softness reserved for her alone. "I will be ruthless in protecting you," he said, "and I will be ruthless in reforming this kingdom into something worthy of you. But with you, Callista, only with you, I want to be something more than the beast they expect." "Then be more," she replied simply. "Be the alpha who shows that strength and compassion are not opposites, but partners. Be the king who proves that power is most potent when it serves rather than subjugates." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them, until her breath mingled with his in the cool night air. "And I will be the Luna, who stands beside you, who carries the voice of those who have no voice, who remembers the old ways while building new ones." When their lips met, it was not the desperate clash of sudden passion, but something deeper, slower, more inevitable. It was the recognition of two souls who had been searching without knowing what they sought, two halves of a whole that had finally aligned. The kiss tasted of moonlight and possibility, of promises made and kept, of a future written in starlight and wolf song. The black wolf let out a soft chuff of approval and settled its massive head on its paws, content to guard the moment. The hearing at dawn was brutal in its efficiency. The nobles who had conspired against Callista were given every opportunity to defend their actions, and they did so with eloquence and conviction, arguing that an unknown woman with dangerous influence among the common people represented a threat to the kingdom's stability. Elijah listened to every word, his face an impassive mask. When they finished, he allowed the silence to stretch, heavy and ominous. Then he spoke. "You speak of stability as though it were the highest virtue. But a kingdom that is stable through suppression and fear is a kingdom built on sand. You saw a woman helping the sick and called it sedition. You witnessed the people's love and named it treason. And when I was not present to stop you, you sentenced her to death without trial, without evidence, without even the basic dignity of allowing her to speak in her own defense." He stood, and the movement was predatory, every inch the alpha wolf beneath the king's crown. "You say you acted in the kingdom's interest, but you acted in your own. You feared that your hoarded wealth and inherited privilege would be challenged by someone who dared to suggest that power carries responsibility to those who have none." Elijah's gaze swept across each of the accused, and they withered under it. "I find you guilty not just of conspiracy, but of cowardice. You are stripped of your titles and lands. You will serve the remainder of your days in the northern settlements, teaching the children there to read and write, healing the sick, building the infrastructure you always deemed beneath your notice. You wanted to silence the voice of the common people. You will now live among them and learn exactly what you tried to destroy." The accused erupted in protests, but Elijah silenced them with a gesture. "Be grateful I do not throw you to the beast, though I suspect Callista Turman would not allow such a waste of the Guardian's purpose." Callista stood beside the throne, regal in a new dress of deep blue that made her white hair seem to shimmer. She said nothing, but her presence was statement enough. She was here. She had survived, and she would not be moved. The days that followed saw a transformation in the kingdom's governance. Elijah and Callista worked side by side, reviewing laws, meeting with representatives from every district, listening to grievances that had been ignored for generations. The nobles who remained learned quickly that opposition to the Luna was opposition to the king, and that Elijah Denorius would tolerate neither. But it was in the quiet moments, away from the court and the politics, that their bond truly deepened. Elijah discovered that Callista sang while tending to her herb garden, old songs in a language that predated the kingdom. He would stand at the doorway, watching her move among the plants, her hands gentle and sure, her voice weaving melodies that seemed to make the very air shimmer. Callista learned that Elijah suffered from nightmares, visions of battles past, and fears of failures future. On those nights, she would find him on the castle ramparts, staring out at the sleeping kingdom with tension carved into every line of his body. She would not speak, would not offer platitudes. She would simply stand beside him, her hand finding his, a silent reminder that he no longer bore the weight alone. The Black Wolf, whom Callista had named Shadow for the way he moved through darkness, became a fixture in the castle. The servants learned not to fear him. The guards came to see him as an additional protector, and the children who visited the castle for education programs would gather around him, brave enough to touch his fur while he lay in patient stillness. Shadow was the physical manifestation of the change sweeping through the kingdom. What had been a tool of terror was now a symbol of protection. What had been used to divide was now uniting. 3 months after the trial, on the night of the full moon, Elijah asked Callista to walk with him to the highest tower of the castle. The city spread below them, lights flickering in windows, the distant sound of music and laughter carried on the wind. Above, the moon hung full and luminous, painting the world in shades of silver and shadow. "I brought you here because this is where I come when I need to remember why I rule," Elijah said. "From here, you can see the whole of the capital, the wealthy quarters and the poor, the grand boulevards and the narrow alleys, every life, every dream, every struggle. It is easy, in the throne room, to forget that governance is not about power, but about people." Callista leaned against the parapet, her hair lifting in the breeze. "And what do you see when you look out at them now?" "I see what we are building together," he replied. "A kingdom where a healer from a border village can stand beside a king, where ancient wisdom and new ideas work in harmony, where the wolf and the moon are not symbols of fear, but of protection and guidance." He pulled something from his pocket. A ring, wrought in silver that matched her medallion, set with a stone that seemed to capture moonlight within its depths. "I see a future where you are not just my advisor, not just the voice of the people, but my Luna in truth. Recognized by law and bond, by moon and pack, by every soul in this kingdom." He held the ring out to her, and his hand trembled slightly, the only sign of vulnerability in the powerful king. "Callista Turman, will you accept this bond? Will you stand with me as we reshape this kingdom into something worthy of both our dreams?" Callista looked at the ring, then at Elijah, then out at the city they had begun to transform together. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of prophecy and promise. "I will," she said, "not because you are a king, but because you are a man who ran through stone corridors to save someone he barely knew. Because you knelt before me when you could have demanded I kneel to you. Because you see governance as service, and power as responsibility. And because when you look at me, you see not a tool to be used, or a threat to be eliminated, but a partner." She took the ring, sliding it onto her finger where it fit, as though it had been forged for her alone. "I will stand with you, Elijah Denorius. I will be your Luna, your equal, your companion in all things. And together, we will prove that the old ways and the new can coexist, that strength and compassion are not enemies, that a kingdom built on justice and mercy is stronger than one built on fear." Elijah pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, fitting against him as though they had been designed for each other. The kiss they shared under the full moon was witnessed only by the stars and the great black wolf who watched from the shadows below, guardian of the past and protector of the future. the coronation of Callista Termin, as Luna was unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. Instead of a private ceremony in the castle chapel, Elijah insisted it take place in the great square, where every citizen who wished to attend could witness. Thousands gathered, filling the space to capacity, spilling into side streets, climbing onto rooftops for a better view. Callista wore white, a gown that echoed her hair, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that told the story of the first Lunas. The medallion rested against her heart, visible to all. She walked to the dais not through a corridor of nobles, but through a path lined by the people she had healed, the children she had taught, the families she had fought for. Elijah stood waiting, magnificent in his formal regalia, his long black hair unbound, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the air between them seem to shimmer. When she reached him, he took both her hands in his. Before the moon and the pack, before the kingdom and its people, I recognize Callista Termin as my Luna, my equal in authority and in heart. She brings to this crown not just her wisdom and compassion, but the legacy of those who came before, the bridge between old ways and new, between wolf and human, between power and service. He lifted a second crown from the cushion held by an attendant. It was wrought in silver, delicate yet strong, set with moonstones that caught and reflected light, as though the moon itself had been captured in metal. Callista knelt, and Elijah placed the crown upon her head. When she rose, the crowd erupted, not in polite applause, but in genuine jubilation. They had seen this woman face death and emerge triumphant. They had witnessed her transformation from unknown healer to recognized Luna. They knew that her presence on the throne beside Elijah meant that their voices would now reach the highest levels of power. But the ceremony was not complete. From the edge of the square, shadow emerged. The great black wolf moved through the crowd, which parted for him with reverent silence. He climbed the steps to the dais and took his place behind Callista, his golden eyes scanning the assembly with protective authority. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The beast that had once been a tool of execution now stood guard over the Luna, visible proof that the old order had given way to something new, something better. Elijah and Callista turned to face their kingdom, hand in hand, crowned and recognized, flanked by the ancient guardian who had waited generations for this moment. And in that instant, under the open sky with the full moon rising in the east, the kingdom understood that it had entered a new era. The months that followed were not without challenges. There were nobles who resisted the reforms, merchants who tried to maintain their monopolies, factions that sought to drive wedges between the new Luna and her king. But they underestimated the bond that had been forged in the beast's pit and tempered in moonlight. Elijah was fierce in his protection of Callista, and ruthless in his dismantling of systems that perpetuated inequality. When nobles attempted to undermine her authority by questioning her decisions in council, he made it clear that disrespect to the Luna was disrespect to the crown itself. When merchants tried to circumvent her economic reforms, he personally led investigations into their business practices and found the corruption she had predicted. To the world, to his enemies, to anyone who threatened what he had built with Callista, Elijah was implacable. He wielded his power like the blade it was, cutting away rot and resistance with surgical precision. But with Callista, he was transformed. In the private quarters they shared, he was gentle. His hands, so capable of violence in battle, would cradle her face with reverence. His voice, which could command armies, would soften to whispers as he asked about her day, her concerns, her dreams. He learned the exact pressure she liked when he massaged the tension from her shoulders after long council sessions. He memorized the way she took her tea, the books she preferred, the songs that made her smile. Callista, for her part, saw both sides of him and loved them equally. She understood that his fierceness in the world was not cruelty but protection, that his ruthlessness was applied only to those who would harm the vulnerable. She did not try to soften him or change him. Instead, she complimented him, bringing wisdom where he brought strength, offering mercy where he delivered justice, providing the balance that made their rule not just effective but transformative. They had their disagreements, of course. Callista sometimes felt that Elijah was too harsh in his punishments, too quick to see threat where there might be misunderstanding. Elijah occasionally thought that Callista was too trusting, too willing to give second chances to those who had not earned them. But they learned to navigate these differences, to argue with respect and resolve with compromise. They discovered that their bond was strengthened, not despite their disagreements, but because of how they handled them. One evening, after a particularly heated debate about how to handle a border dispute, they stood on opposite sides of their chambers, tension crackling between them. "You cannot solve every problem with compassion," Elijah said, his voice tight with frustration. "Sometimes, force is the only language aggressors understand. And you cannot build a lasting peace through intimidation," Callista countered. "Fear may achieve compliance, but it breeds resentment that will erupt eventually." They glared at each other across the room. Then simultaneously, they began to laugh. The absurdity of it struck them both, the recognition that they were fighting about the same goal through different methods. Elijah crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "We are quite the pair," he murmured against her hair. "The wolf who wants to protect everyone and the moon who wants to heal everyone." Callista wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. "Perhaps that is why we work," she replied. "You keep me from being so merciful that I enable cruelty. I keep you from being so fierce that you become what you fight against." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of moonflowers that always seemed to cling to her. "I need you," he admitted, the words raw. "Not as a king needs a Luna, but as a man needs air. You are my conscience and my comfort, my challenge and my peace. Without you, I am only half of what I could be. And I need you," Callista whispered. "Your strength, your conviction, your unwavering determination to create something better. You make me brave enough to speak truths that terrify me. You give me the power to enact changes I once only dreamed of." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, finding in their embrace the resolution that words alone could not provide. The border dispute was eventually settled through a combination of Elijah's strategic military positioning and Callista's diplomatic negotiations with the neighboring kingdom's Luna. It became a template for how they would handle conflicts going forward, his strength providing the security necessary for her diplomacy to flourish, her wisdom preventing his strength from being applied unnecessarily. A year after Callista's coronation as Luna, the kingdom had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. New schools opened in districts that had never seen formal education. Medical clinics staffed by healers trained under Callista's supervision provided care regardless of a family's ability to pay. Roads were repaired, wells were dug, and infrastructure that had been neglected for decades received attention and funding. But more than the physical changes, there was a shift in the kingdom's spirit. The people walked taller, spoke more freely, engaged in governance rather than simply enduring it. Town councils that had once been rubber stamps for noble decrees now actively debated policies and sent recommendations to the capital. The Luna's open court, where Callista heard grievances every week, became so popular that a lottery system had to be implemented to manage the crowds. Elijah watched these changes with pride that bordered on awe. In council meetings, he would sometimes catch himself simply staring at Callista as she explained a new initiative or negotiated a compromise between feuding factions. She was magnificent, every inch the Luna that the kingdom had needed without knowing it. One such moment came during a discussion about tax reform. A group of wealthy landowners were protesting new rates that would fund education in rural areas. They presented their case with eloquence and charts, arguing that the burden was unfair, that they already contributed enough. Callista listened patiently, her expression neutral. When they finished, she thanked them for their presentation. Then she stood and spoke with a calm that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. You speak of fairness, gentlemen. But let us examine what that word means. You inherited your lands from ancestors, who were gifted them by kings, who needed their military service. You did not earn them through labor or ingenuity. You simply had the fortune to be born into the right families. The landowners shifted uncomfortably, but she continued. The farmers who work your fields pay you rent that consumes half their harvest. When their children fall ill, they have no access to healers because the nearest clinic is a day's walk away, and they cannot afford to lose a day's labor. Those children grow up illiterate because there are no schools in their villages, and so they remain farmers, paying rent to your children, perpetuating a cycle you call natural, but which is simply the result of systems designed to benefit you. She leaned forward, and her eyes flashed with conviction. The tax you protest would fund education for those children. It would build clinics in those villages. It would create opportunities for people to rise through merit rather than birth. And yes, it would cost you a fraction of the wealth you did nothing to earn. So tell me, gentlemen, what is fair? That you maintain every advantage while children die of preventable diseases, or that you contribute to a kingdom that values all its people, not just those lucky enough to be born in the right beds? The silence that followed was absolute. The landowners had no response, no counter-argument that did not expose the selfishness of their position. Elijah felt his heart swell with admiration, and something deeper, fiercer. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, not in spite of her strength, but because of it. The Luna has spoken, he said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. The tax reform will proceed as written. This council is dismissed. Later, in their private chambers, he caught Callista from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. That was extraordinary, he murmured into her hair. You dismantled their entire argument without raising your voice or dismissing their humanity. She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. I learned from watching you, she said. You are fierce in battle, but you never forget that even your enemies are people. You defeat them without dehumanizing them. Elijah kissed her palms, first one, then the other. We make each other better, he said. You temper my fire. I fuel your courage. We are balanced, she agreed. Moon and wolf, Luna and Alpha. He kissed her then, deeply, pouring into the contact all the love and respect and desire that filled him whenever he looked at her. Callista responded with equal passion, her fingers threading through his long hair, her body molding to his as though they were two parts of one whole. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Elijah rested his forehead against hers. I want to give you something, he said. Not as king to Luna, but as man to woman. You have given me everything, Callista protested softly. A crown, a voice, a purpose. Not everything, he said. There is one thing I have held back, not intentionally, but because I did not know how to offer it. He stepped back, taking her hands in his. My heart, Callista. Completely, without reservation, without the armor I have worn since childhood. I want you to know that when I am with you, I am not the king who must always be strong, always be right, always be in control. I am simply Elijah, a man who loves you more than breath, who trusts you with his fears and doubts, who wants nothing more than to build a life with you that is about more than crowns and kingdoms. Tears gathered in Callista's eyes, but they were tears of joy. And I give you my heart in return, she whispered, the part of me that is not Luna, not healer, not descendant of legends, simply Callista, who found in you a partner and a home, who loves you fiercely and completely, who wants to share not just your throne, but your life. They came together again, and this time, the kiss was different. It was not the passionate claim of lovers, but the tender recognition of souls who had found their match. They moved to the bed not with urgency, but with reverence, taking their time to explore, to worship, to celebrate the bond that had been forged in fire and tempered in moonlight. The kingdom continued to flourish under their joint rule. Innovations that had been suppressed for fear they would disrupt the status quo were now encouraged. Artists and inventors flocked to the capital, knowing they would find support and patronage. Trade agreements were negotiated with neighboring kingdoms, bringing prosperity that was shared more equitably than ever before. Shadow, the great black wolf, remained a constant presence. He had become something of a legend himself, the beast who bowed to the Luna, the guardian who symbolized the new order. Children grew up hearing stories of how he had recognized Callista's true nature, how he now protected the kingdom alongside the Alpha and Luna. But there were still threats. Not all the nobles had accepted the changes gracefully. Some plotted in secret, seeking ways to undermine Callista's authority or drive a wedge between her and Elijah. They spread rumors, whispered poison, tried to exploit any crack in the united front the royal couple presented. One such plot came to fruition on a winter evening. Callista was returning from a visit to a newly opened clinic in the Eastern District when her carriage was ambushed. Assassins emerged from the shadows, their faces covered, their intentions clear. But they had not accounted for Shadow. The great wolf appeared from nowhere, a black fury that tore through the attackers with savage efficiency. His roar echoed through the streets, and guards came running. The assassins fled, leaving behind their wounded and their plans. When Elijah received word of the attack, his rage was terrible to behold. He personally interrogated the captured assassins, and when they revealed the noble house that had funded them, his response was swift and absolute. He rode to the estate in question with a full contingent of guards. The noble, a man named Lord Varon, who had been vocal in his opposition to Callista's reforms, tried to deny involvement. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Elijah was in no mood for games. "You attempted to murder my Luna," Elijah said, his voice quiet and all the more menacing for it. "Not because she wronged you, but because she dared to suggest that your wealth should serve the kingdom rather than only yourself." Lord Varon sputtered protests, but Elijah cut him off with a gesture. "You are stripped of your title and lands. You will be exiled to the northern wastes, where you will live or die by your own labor, with none of the privilege you squandered on attempted murder. And you will count yourself fortunate that I value Callista's mercy more than my own rage, because if the choice were mine alone, you would not leave this estate alive." The noble paled, but Elijah was not finished. "Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks to harm the Luna. She is mine to protect, and I will burn this kingdom to ash before I allow harm to come to her." The message spread rapidly. Whatever plots might have been brewing in dark corners were abandoned. Elijah Denorius had made it clear that opposition to his policies might be tolerated, but threats to Callista would be met with annihilation. When he returned to the castle, he went straight to Callista's chambers. She was unharmed, sitting by the fire with Shadow at her feet. But Elijah needed to see her with his own eyes, to touch her and confirm that she was whole. She rose when he entered, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that spoke of fear barely conquered. "I should have been there," he said hoarsely. "I should have been protecting you." Callista held him tightly, feeling the tremors that ran through his powerful frame. "Shadow was there," she reminded him gently, "and the guards you assigned to me did their duty. I am unharmed, Elijah, but you could have been," he whispered, "if they had succeeded, if I had lost you." He could not finish the thought. The very idea of a world without Callista in it was unbearable. She pulled back enough to look into his eyes, her hands framing his face. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "We knew there would be resistance. We knew that changing a kingdom built on inequality would make enemies. But we cannot live in fear, Elijah. We cannot let the possibility of harm prevent us from doing what is right." "I know," he said, But knowing it and feeling it are different things. When I heard you had been attacked, something in me broke. I realized that all the power I wield, all the authority I command, means nothing if I cannot keep you safe. Then do not try to keep me safe, Callista said. Stand with me. Fight beside me. Trust that I am strong enough to face the dangers that come with being your Luna. She pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling. We are pack, she whispered. Moon and wolf, and the pack protects itself, not through fear, but through unity. Elijah felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. She was right. He could not wrap her in protection so thick that it became a prison. She was Luna, and that meant facing danger, making hard choices, standing in the crossfire of a kingdom in transformation. But he could stand with her. He could make sure she never faced those dangers alone. I love you, he said, the words inadequate for the depth of emotion they were meant to convey. I love you with a ferocity that frightens me. You are my heart, Callista, the best part of me. And I will spend every day of my life ensuring that you know it. And I love you, she replied, your strength and your tenderness, your fierceness and your gentleness. You are my anchor and my wings, the ground beneath my feet, and the wind that lifts me higher. They kissed then, soft and slow, a reaffirmation of the bond that had been tested, but not broken. As spring arrived, bringing renewal to the kingdom, Callista discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had seen enough difficult births in her healing work to know the risks, but she had also witnessed the miracle of new life, the way it transformed everything it touched. She told Elijah on a morning when sunlight streamed through their chambers, turning everything golden. He had been reviewing reports at his desk, but when she spoke the words, he went completely still. Say that again, he whispered. I am carrying our child, Callista repeated, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Elijah stood slowly, as though afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. He crossed to her, his eyes searching her face. You are certain? She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. The healer confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Elijah's reaction was not what she expected. He did not shout with joy or sweep her into a celebratory embrace. Instead, he knelt before her, his hands coming to rest gently on her hips, his forehead pressing against her stomach. A child, he breathed. Our child. She ran her fingers through his hair, feeling the tremor in his shoulders. Are you afraid? She asked softly. Terrified, he admitted. I have led armies and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But this, the responsibility of being a father, of protecting both you and our child, it is the most daunting thing I have ever faced. We will face it together, Callista said, as we have faced everything else. Elijah looked up at her, and his eyes shone with tears he did not bother to hide. I swear to you, to our child, to the moon and the pack, that I will be the father I never had. I will be present, involved, loving. I will teach our child to be strong but also kind, to rule with wisdom and compassion, to understand that power is a responsibility, not a privilege. Callista helped him to his feet and wrapped her arms around him. I know you will, she said. I have seen your heart, Elijah Denorius. I have witnessed your capacity for love and protection. Our child will be blessed to have you as a father. The pregnancy was announced to the kingdom with great celebration. Festivals were held, gifts poured in from every district, and the people rejoiced at the prospect of an heir who would embody both the old Luna bloodline and the current king's strength. But Elijah became even more protective than before. He attended every healer's visit, hovering with concern that made Callista both exasperated and touched. He modified their daily routines to reduce her stress, insisted she rest more, and personally oversaw the preparations for the royal nursery. To the court, He was as fierce as ever, perhaps more so. Anyone who questioned Callista's ability to continue her duties during pregnancy found themselves facing the full force of the king's wrath. But in their private moments, he was impossibly gentle, his hands reverent as they traced the growing curve of her belly, his voice soft as he spoke to the child within. "I will tell you stories of your mother," he would whisper to her stomach. How she faced the beast with courage, how she transformed a kingdom with wisdom, how she taught me that true strength lies in the willingness to be vulnerable. Callista would lie in his arms, content and peaceful, listening to him share his hopes and dreams for their child. The birth was difficult. It lasted through the night and into the following day, and there were moments when the healers exchanged worried glances. Elijah refused to leave, despite protocol suggesting the king should wait elsewhere. He held Callista's hand through every contraction, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, whispered encouragement and love. When their daughter finally entered the world, her first cry was strong and clear. She had Elijah's dark hair and Callista's pale eyes, a perfect blend of her parents' features. The healers placed the baby in Callista's arms, and Elijah knelt beside the bed, his large hand gentle on the tiny head. "She is perfect," he breathed. "She is ours," Callista replied, tears streaming down her face. They named her Lyanna, after the first recorded Luna in the ancient texts, and as word spread through the castle and out into the kingdom, Shadow lifted his head and howled, a sound of joy and welcome that was taken up by every wolf within hearing distance. The kingdom had its heir, and the future had never looked brighter. As Lyanna grew, she proved to be a child of two worlds. She had her father's strength and determination, but also her mother's compassion and wisdom. She could command the attention of the court with a presence beyond her years, but she also played in the gardens with common children, learning early that a crown did not make her better, only more responsible. The first time Lyanna shifted into her wolf form, she was barely 5 years old. It happened in the gardens, triggered by joy rather than anger. One moment she was chasing butterflies, the next a small dark-furred pup tumbled through the flowers, yipping with delight. Callista had been nearby, tending to her herbs, and she watched with wonder as her daughter experienced the transformation that was her birthright. Shadow emerged from the shadows, approaching the pup with gentle dignity, and began to teach her the ways of the wolf. Elijah arrived moments later, drawn by the sound of his daughter's excitement. Seeing Lyanna in her wolf form for the first time struck him with profound emotion. She was so small, so vulnerable in this shape, yet so perfectly herself. He shifted as well, his own wolf larger and more imposing, and the three wolves, Shadow, Elijah, and tiny Lyanna, ran through the gardens together, while Callista watched with tears of joy streaming down her face. These became precious moments, the royal family escaping the formality of court to run wild under the moon. Callista would often join them in meditation afterward, teaching Lyanna the old ways, the songs of the first lunas, the connection between wolf and moon that transcended simple transformation. Elijah and Callista raised her together, sharing duties and decisions with intentionality. Every morning they would breakfast as a family, discussing not just affairs of state, but also Lyanna's studies, her fears, her dreams. Elijah taught her strategy and combat, but he also taught her that true strength included knowing when not to fight. Callista taught her healing and diplomacy, but she also taught her that compassion did not mean weakness. One particular lesson came when Lyanna was 7. A young thief had been caught stealing bread from the market. The child was brought before the throne, trembling with fear, expecting harsh punishment. Lyanna sat beside her parents, small but already regal in her bearing. She watched as Elijah questioned the boy, his voice stern but not unkind. "Why did you steal?" "My family is hungry, Your Majesty. My father was injured in the mines and cannot work. My mother does her best, but it is not enough." Elijah looked to Callista, and she gave the slightest nod. Then he turned to Lyanna. "What would you do, daughter?" Lyanna stood, her young voice clear and confident. I would ask why a family with an injured father has no support from the kingdom we built. I would ask what happened to the workers' compensation we established. I would ask why this child had to steal bread instead of receiving the help that should be his right. The court went silent. Elijah felt pride surge through him. His daughter had not focused on the crime, but on the system that had failed to prevent it. Well said, he told her. Then he addressed the boy. You will not be punished for trying to feed your family. Instead, you will lead us to your home, and we will investigate why the protections we put in place did not reach you. What followed was a thorough investigation that revealed corruption in the mining district's administration. Officials who had been pocketing funds meant for injured workers were removed and prosecuted. The boy's family was given full compensation, and reforms were implemented to prevent such failures in the future. That night, Elijah tucked Leanna into bed, smoothing her dark hair back from her forehead. You did well today, he told her. You saw past the surface to the deeper problem. That is the mark of a true leader. Mama taught me to ask why, Leanna said sleepily. She says that understanding the cause is the first step to creating a solution. Your mother is wise, Elijah agreed. And you are blessed to learn from her. And from you, Leanna added, her pale eyes, so like Callista's, looking up at him with complete trust. You taught me to be strong, but also fair, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Elijah kissed her forehead, his heart full. Sleep now, little Luna. Tomorrow there will be more lessons, more challenges, more opportunities to shape the kingdom you will one day lead. But Leanna was already asleep, dreaming of a future where justice and mercy walked hand in hand, where strength served compassion, where the bond between ruler and people was sacred and unbreakable. Shadow became the child's constant companion. The great wolf who had once been feared as a beast of execution was now a gentle guardian, patient with tiny hands that pulled his fur and small feet that tripped over his massive paws. He would lie in the nursery for hours, a mountain of black fur serving as both bed and protector, his golden eyes watchful even in rest. As Leanna grew older, Shadow began to teach her things that neither parent could. He showed her how to move silently through the forest, how to read the wind and track prey, how to understand the language of the wild that existed beneath the civilized world. He taught her that the wolf was not separate from the human, but an integral part of a complete self. One autumn evening, when Leanna was 10, she asked her mother about the day in the pit. Were you scared, Mama? When they threw you to the beast? Callista and Leanna sat in the garden, the girl's head resting on her mother's shoulder, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I was, Callista admitted, but not of the beast. I was scared that I would die without having lived, that my purpose would remain unfulfilled, that the truth I carried would be lost. But you had the medallion, Leanna said, touching the pendant that her mother still wore. You knew Shadow would recognize you. Callista shook her head gently. I hoped, she corrected, but I did not know. The medallion was my grandmother's legacy, and she told me it would protect me in my darkest hour. But standing in that pit, facing a creature of legend, I had to trust in something deeper than knowledge. I had to trust in the bond between Luna and Guardian, in the truth of who I was, even when I had no proof it would be enough. And it was, Leanna said softly. And it was, Callista agreed. But the greater miracle was not that Shadow bowed to me. It was that your father ran through those corridors, terrified he would be too late, driven by something deeper than duty or politics. He ran for me, Leanna. Not for the kingdom's stability, not for the political advantage of having a Luna. He ran because the thought of losing me was unbearable to him. Leanna was quiet for a moment, processing this. That is what love is, she finally said. Not the grand gestures, but the running through corridors, the choosing each other again and again, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard, Callista said, pulling her daughter closer. Remember this, my darling. Power and crowns and ancient legacies matter, but they mean nothing without the bonds we forge with others. Your father and I rule a kingdom, but our greatest achievement is the love we have built, the family we have created, the partnership that makes everything else possible. The years brought challenges that tested the royal family in new ways. When Lyanna was 12, a plague struck the eastern provinces. It was aggressive and deadly, spreading faster than healers could contain it. Callista immediately mobilized, organizing relief efforts and distributing medicines, but it quickly became clear that she would need to go to the affected regions herself. Elijah opposed the idea vehemently. "You cannot risk yourself," he argued, pacing their chambers with barely contained agitation. "Send your best healers. Send resources. Send anything but yourself." "And what message does that send?" Callista countered, her voice calm but firm. "That the Luna cares for her people only from a safe distance. That when danger comes, leadership abandons those who need it most." "I cannot lose you," Elijah said, the words torn from someplace deep and raw. "Not to disease, not to anything. You are my heart, Callista. Without you, I am nothing." She went to him, taking his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "And that is exactly why I must go," she said gently. "Because I am your heart. I can show the kingdom what it means to lead with love instead of fear. Because I am Luna, I must be where my people need me most. You taught me that power is responsibility, Elijah. I am responsible for them." He closed his eyes, agony written across his features. "Then I go with you." "No," Callista said firmly. "The kingdom needs you here, managing the quarantine, ensuring supplies reach the affected areas, maintaining order. We lead together, remember? I will be your hands in the east. You will be my foundation in the capital. And if you fall ill, then you will know that I died doing what a Luna is meant to do," she said. "But I will not fall ill. I have survived the beast's pit, my love. I will survive this." It was the hardest thing Elijah had ever done, watching her ride out with her contingent of healers and guards, knowing that disease was not an enemy he could fight with sword or strategy. He could only trust in her strength, her knowledge, her determination to return to him. The weeks she was gone were torture. Reports came regularly, detailing the progress of the relief efforts, the number of lives saved, the slow containment of the plague. But they also detailed the exhaustion in Callista's face, the endless hours she worked, the risks she took nursing the sickest patients. Elijah threw himself into governance with ferocious energy, managing the kingdom's response with precision born of desperation. He ensured that food reached quarantined villages, that families of the sick received support, that fear did not turn into panic or violence. And every night he stood on the ramparts with Shadow at his side, staring east toward where Callista worked, willing her to stay safe, to stay healthy, to come home. Lyanna watched her father during this time and saw the man beneath the king. She saw how he would grip the stone railings until his knuckles went white, how his jaw would clench when reports were delayed, how he would retreat to their private chambers and emerge red-eyed but composed. One night, she found him on the ramparts, as had become his habit. "She will come back," Lyanna said quietly, slipping her small hand into his large one. Elijah looked down at his daughter, seeing Callista's eyes looking back at him, and felt tears he had been holding back finally fall. "I know," he said, "but the knowing does not make the waiting easier." "Tell me about when you met her," Lyanna requested, settling against her father's side. "Tell me the story again." And so Elijah told his daughter about a woman in a red dress who refused to beg or cry, about a beast that bowed to true authority, about running through corridors with fear clawing at his throat, about arriving too late to save her only to discover she had never needed saving. He told her about falling in love with strength and compassion, about learning that true partnership meant complementing rather than completing, about discovering that the crown was lighter when shared. Lyanna listened, as she had 100 times before, and understood that this story was not just about the past. It was about the present, about a love so deep that separation felt like dying, about a bond so strong that distance could not diminish it. Callista returned 6 weeks later, thinner and exhausted, but triumphant. The plague had been contained, the death toll minimized by her intervention and expertise. She rode through the castle gates to a hero's welcome, but her eyes sought only one person in the crowd. Elijah was there, having been alerted to her approach. He had waited for this moment with every fiber of his being, and when she dismounted, he was already moving, crossing the courtyard in long strides that became a run. They collided in the center of the courtyard, his arms wrapping around her, lifting her off her feet, his face buried in her hair. The crowd cheered, but neither of them heard. There was only each other, only the relief of reunion, only the confirmation that the bond between them had survived yet another test. "You came back," Elijah whispered hoarsely. "You came back to me." "Always," Callista replied, her own tears mixing with his. "Always, my love. Always." That night, in their chambers, with Lyanna asleep down the hall and Shadow standing guard, Elijah traced every line of Callista's face, as though memorizing her anew. "I aged a lifetime in those weeks," he confessed. "Every moment you were gone, I felt your absence like a wound. And I felt your presence," Callista countered. "Every night, I would look at the moon and know you were looking at the same sky, thinking of me, trusting in me. That trust gave me strength when my own faltered." She took his hand, pressing it over her heart. "We are bound, Elijah. Not just by titles or ceremony, but by something deeper. Distance cannot break us. Time cannot diminish us. We are Moon and Wolf, Luna and Alpha, and that bond is eternal." He kissed her then, pouring weeks of fear and longing into the contact, celebrating her return with every touch, every whispered word of love, every shared breath. They made love slowly, tenderly, a reaffirmation of life and connection, a reminder that they had found in each other a home that transcended physical presence. As the years continued to pass, Elijah and Callista's rule became the stuff of legend. Other kingdoms sent delegations to study their methods, to understand how they had created such prosperity and stability. But the secret was not in policy or strategy alone. It was in the genuine partnership between Alpha and Luna, in the balance of strength and compassion, in the willingness to listen as much as lead. They had their disagreements, their conflicts, their moments of frustration with each other. But they never went to bed angry, never let wounds fester, never allowed pride to build walls between them. They had learned early that their bond was their greatest strength, and they protected it as fiercely as they protected their kingdom. Years passed, and the kingdom continued to evolve. The reforms Callista had championed took root and flourished. Education became universal, healthcare accessible, economic opportunity more evenly distributed. Other kingdoms began to look to them as a model, sending emissaries to study their governance and implement similar changes in their own lands. Elijah and Callista aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their arguments and their struggles, times when the weight of governance seemed too heavy to bear. But they always returned to each other, to the bond that had been forged in the beast's pit and proven unbreakable through years of testing. On their 10th anniversary as Alpha and Luna, they stood together on the same tower where Elijah had proposed. The kingdom spread below them, lights twinkling like stars brought to earth. "Do you ever regret it?" Elijah asked quietly. "The danger, the responsibility, the burden of the crown?" Callista leaned into his side, fitting perfectly against him as she always had. "Never," she said. "This life has been more than I ever dreamed possible. We have built something beautiful together, something that will outlast us and benefit generations to come. Elijah wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They threw you into the beast's den to be devoured, he said. But you tamed the untamable, transformed the kingdom, and gave me a purpose I did not know I was missing. We tamed each other, Callista corrected gently. You taught me that strength and compassion are not opposites. I taught you that power is most potent when used in service. Together, we became more than either of us could have been alone. Below them, the city thrived. Children slept safely in their beds, knowing that their kingdom was led by rulers who cared for their well-being. Scholars studied in libraries that had been built to share knowledge rather than hoard it. Healers tended the sick regardless of their ability to pay. The future was being written in acts of justice and mercy, in policies that valued people over profit, in the daily choices of leaders who had learned that governance was about service. From the shadows at the base of the tower, Shadow watched with golden eyes, ancient and knowing. He had waited generations for the Luna who would fulfill the prophecy, the one who would bridge the old ways and the new, who would remind the kingdom that the bond between Alpha and Luna was sacred, transformative, eternal. He had found her, and in finding her, the kingdom had found itself. Elijah turned Callista to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. When I ran through those corridors, terrified I would arrive too late, I thought I was racing to save you, he said. But you saved me, Callista. You saved me from becoming a king without a kingdom, a ruler without connection to those I ruled. You showed me that the crown is not a burden to be borne alone, but a responsibility to be shared. Callista reached up, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, memorizing features she knew as well as her own. And you gave me a voice that echoes through these halls, a power to enact changes I once only dreamed about. A love I never thought to find, she replied. We saved each other, my king. We continue to save each other every day. They kissed under the stars, two people who had found in each other the completion they had not known they lacked. The moon hung full and bright above them, witness to the bond that had transformed a kingdom, to the love that had rewritten destiny. She was thrown into the beast's den to be devoured, but the monster bowed before the secret Luna, and together, they changed the world. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.